Hi guys, thanks for joining me. Last week we thought about the idea of trusting God, and this week we're thinking about where we see God in our lives. So I think this is something that I've struggled with certainly in the past, and something that's not always easy to do, to think about where we see God in our lives. You know, we're in the middle of something at the moment that's really challenging and can bring lots of difficulties and questions to our faith. Last week we thought about how we can trust God and trust that this is part of his plan in some way, but that's not always easy. And when we struggle to trust God, and when we struggle with the consequences and the realities of life, it becomes difficult to see God. All the way through my life, there have been moments and times when my relationship with God has been absolutely brilliant, and I'm really confident and assured of his presence alongside me. But there have also been moments when those challenges appear and those doubts surface. You know, when relationships fall apart, when things don't go well at work, when things didn't go well at school, or in November when we particularly think about them, when people pass away. It's difficult for us to see God, to recognize him in our lives, and to know that he is guiding us and that this is all part of his plan. I think when we think about God and where people might see God, a lot of the media, a lot of, films and shows on TV, they have this idea of the heavens opening and God's booming voice commanding someone to go a certain way, or the clouds parting and a giant finger sort of coming out of the sky and pointing at where people need to go or what they need to do with their life. And we know that isn't always the reality. We know that that's not something that's going to occur very often. So where do we see God? How do we see God? And how does God interact with us? And I think the reality and the answer to that question is that God is much more subtle than that. You know, I think about all of the times when I've known his presence to be real in my life, when I've known that he's there alongside me. And it's not from some big booming voice, it's from some gentle nudge or gentle acknowledgement or gentle affirmation that he is there and that he is working alongside me. And when we read scripture, we see examples of the subtleness of God. And one of my favourite pieces of scripture in the whole Bible that really shows this is from the first book of Kings. And in it, Elijah is sent by God to a mountaintop, and God says that he will pass, and Elijah will recognise that God is there. And Elijah stands there, and there's an enormous wind, and the mountains and the rocks tumble, and there's great destruction. But it says that God was not in the wind, and after the wind there was an earthquake, and after the earthquake came fire, but God wasn't in those. And then Elijah realizes and recognizes the presence of God in what is described as a small, still voice, or a quiet whisper, or perhaps even in silence. Silence is something that's really uncomfortable. It's really difficult. It's really challenging. When we're alone in silence, we're really aware of our thoughts. We're really aware of what's going on in our lives, and that can sometimes be really difficult. But the scripture tells us that in silence, God is there, and God is alongside us. And often people will ask, well, why doesn't God open the heavens and shout? Why doesn't God do all of these things? And that's, a perfectly good question. When we think about the devil and all of the fake and empty promises that he makes, they're often loud and in our face, and God doesn't do that. And I think the answer to that question is really simple. God is so close to us, God is so near, that he doesn't need to shout. He just needs to gently whisper. And what we need to do is listen for that. And silence is the best place to do that listening. And I know personally that in moments of silence, and it's not something I've always been comfortable with, it's something I've had to grow accustomed to. But in moments of silence, those are some of the most profound experiences of God's presence in my life. But they also give us a chance to reflect and to think about where God has been in our life. And so I want to invite you to have a few moments of silence. I'm going to put that scripture quote up. The video will play, but there will be no background noise, just silence. And I'd encourage you just to engage with it and embrace it, and maybe to allow it to go on for longer than the video will. But just to enter into this silence and trust that God is there with you, to listen for the voice of God and to recognize where he's been in your life today. And so I hope you enjoyed that time of silence, and I hope that silence is something that you can bring regularly into your lives. You know, as we go through this period of lockdown, it's a really wonderful opportunity for us to reconnect with God, to strengthen our prayer life, and maybe to find some time each day to be still and silent, to listen for the voice of God and to recognize where he's been in your lives. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks. Goodbye.